Jon Snow's real name is a theory predicated on Jon Snow being the child of Lyanna and Rhaegar. Assuming Jon Snow is a scion of House Targaryen, he would have been given a Targaryen name at birth, chosen by Rhaegar ahead of time. The name Jon Snow was chosen by Eddard to hide his Targaryen ancestry, protecting Jon from Robert, who would kill any Targaryen he could get his hands on. By naming him Jon, he evokes Robert and Ned's common foster father, Jon Arryn, and hides him in plain sight. Should Jon's parents be Ned or Brandon instead, this theory is irrelevant, as there would be no reason to conceal his identity, bastards being born of noble men being a common enough occurrence, Robert himself having produced at least 8. However, several hints in the story suggest to me that Jon Snow is in fact Lyanna's child. Point 1. Catelyn failed to persuade Ned to send Jon away, and came to the conclusion that Ned must have loved Jon's mother fiercely. However, in Ned's very first chapter, we are revealed that the woman he had indeed loved with all his heart was his sister Lyanna. Ned's loyalty and family duty and love to his sister prevents him from bowing to Catelyn's demands, earning her ire. And the risk to the family as a result of harbouring a Targaryen child necessitates the secrecy. Point 2. In A Clash of Kings, during Daenerys' House of the Undying Visions, she perceives a blue flower growing from a chink in a wall of ice. This vision is seen as prophetic. In Jon's own chapters, in A Clash of Kings, he has recounted a tale by Ygritte, telling the story of Bael the Bard. North or south, singers always find a ready welcome, so Bael ate at Lord Stark's own table, and played for the Lord in his high seat until half the night was gone. The old songs he played, and new ones he'd made himself, and he played and sang so well that when he was done, the Lord offered to name him his own reward. All I ask is a flower, Bael answered, the fairest flower that blooms in the gardens o' Winterfell. Ygritte goes on to explain, now, as it happens, the winter roses had only then come into bloom, and no flower is so rare nor precious. So the Stark sent to his glass gardens and commanded, most beautiful o' the winter roses be plucked for the singer's payment, and so it was done. But when the morning come, the singer had vanished, and so had Lord Brandon's maiden daughter. Her bed they found empty, but for the pale blue rose that Bael had left on the pillow where her head had laid. And later still in this passage, no, they had been in Winterfell all the time, hiding with the dead beneath the castle. The maid loved Bael so dearly she bore him a son, the songs say. Though if truth be told, all maids loved Bael in the songs he wrote. Be that as it may, what's certain is that Bael left the child in payment for the rose he'd plucked unasked, and that the boy grew to be the next Lord Stark. So there it is, you have Bael's blood in you, same as me. Jon 6, A Clash of Kings. And to continue on this point, what we should know about the Lyanna and Rhaegar interaction was that at the tourney of Harrenhal, Rhaegar chose Lyanna as Queen of Love and Beauty and crowned her with a garland of winter roses. From this we see that the winter rose is associated primarily with a daughter of House Stark, and more specifically a daughter that has been kidnapped, for whom Lyanna is, as so was the mysterious daughter of Lord Brandon, of ages past. To close this logical loop, Jon Snow, operating at the wall, being Lyanna's child, this offcut of a winter rose as it was, is growing in a wall of ice, which is the wall itself. Going forward, we will proceed under the assumption that Jon Snow is the son of Lyanna Stark. There have been various proposals for what could be Jon's real name. I will discuss 2 of these. One is deemed ridiculous, and the second possibility I have not seen discussed at all. But first, the family name. Targaryen would only apply to Jon if Rhaegar and Lyanna had at some point married. In my Absurdities videos, I discussed the impossibility of Rhaegar annulling his marriage to Elia Martell or engaging in polygamy. Poly meaning many and the suffix gamy referring to marriage. And Lyanna's betrothal to Robert requires near as much ceremony to revoke. Visenya attempted to marry Maegor the Only to his second wife in a Valyrian ceremony. Melisandre married Alice Karstark to the Magnar of Fen in the fashion of Valor worship. Lyanna Stark was of the old ways and would wed in front of a weirwood. None of these three methods would be recognised by the Faith of the Seven, which makes up the supermajority of Westerosi opinion, unless they were not currently married. By precedent, a child not born of a marriage in the light of the Seven has ascended to the Iron Throne, that being Aegon III, and now that I think about it, his brother Viserys II was married at some point to his own wife in a Lyseni ceremony, I would imagine. The only way for the marriage to be recognised is for Elia to die first, which is problematic for this theory on its own, as canonically Rhaegar died at the Battle of the Trident, preceding Elia's own death during the sack of King's Landing. Elsewise, Jon would have a bastard name. Tradition, however, is that the bastard takes the name of their father's land of origin. Snow makes sense for a bastard of Ned or Brandon. A bastard of Rhaegar would be a Waters. Of course, I should admit that the royal bastards take a slightly different naming convention. Usually a royal marriage, at least in Westeros, the wife keeps their family name, example Cersei Lannister, rather than Cersei Baratheon. And the bastards of Aegon IV, especially ones like Brynden Rivers and Aegor Rivers, kept their mother's bastard names rather than their father's bastard names. Daemon Blackfyre, who was previously Daemon Waters, was born of a Targaryen mother as well as the Targaryen father. In this case, Jon Snow could remain Jon Snow, though, again, Robert Bastard Edric by Delaena Flaunt kept Storm, his father's bastard name, rather. Speaking of ridiculous possibilities, the first is Aegon, what was revealed in Game of Thrones, Season 7. Legitimate due to a random High Septon Maynard, forming a secret annulment for no obvious reason, and a secret marriage in front of a tree, possibly a heart tree. There's a word for this. Aegon, or Aegon, as some dub him, on the surface makes no sense, as Rhaegar already has, or had, a son named Aegon. In the show, it makes an iota's more sense, as young Griff, or Aegon, or Fagon, as he is dubbed, was neglected, or rolled into Jon's own plot. In A Song of Ice and Fire world building, House Targaryen doesn't use the same name twice in a generation. Any child who dies young, stillborn, or due to early mortality keeps their name, and the parents choose differently next time. Except this one time, when Daemon and Rhaenyra decided to name their son Aegon, whilst there was another Aegon alive. Now at the end of the story, only one Aegon was left alive, but for the interim, according to the World Book, when she learned of it, Queen Alicent was said to be enraged, for her own eldest son also bore the Conqueror's name. The two Aegons came to be known as Aegon the Elder and Aegon the Younger. The Targaryen kings, Viserys II, the world of Ice and Fire. And here we take an extreme tangent into a completely different IP. In the story of Frank Herbert's Dune, The protagonist Paul Atreides, Goff, a bastard son of a duke, had 2 sons with his concubine Chani. The first was Leto the second. The second was also Leto the second. The first was killed when the Sardaukar raided the Siege when Paul was off at war. This was Leto the second the Elder. Years later, Chani dies in childbirth, giving birth to fraternal twins, a girl Ganima, and the second Leto the second, referred to as the Younger, at least until he claims his other pseudonym. This may seem like an irrelevant connection, if you don't already know that Frank Herbert's Dune is a significant part of Martin's inspiration milieu. The original draft for Game of Thrones read like a more medieval Dune. You had Jon and Bran getting parts of Paul's plot, Jon the bastard son of a duke, Lord Paramount, Bran, this magical child of destiny, Kwisatz Haderach, who awakens to magical power, Arya, like Alia. House Stark got destroyed at the end of the first act, like House Atreides, and the surviving members had to flee into the north to seek shelter amongst the wildlings, which are like the Fremen. Even in the final version, Jon gets his version of Chani. Tywin, playing the part of Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, has a plan to take over the north, as the Baron would Dune, where he appoints the Boltons to brutalise the north, along with the Greyjoys making a nuisance of themselves, much as Raban would Arrakis, only to replace them later with Tyrion, Fade Rother, would be a messiah by comparison. Lord Tywin steepled his fingers beneath his chin. Balon Greyjoy thinks in terms of plunder, not rule. Let him enjoy an autumn crown and suffer a northern winter. He will give his subjects no cause to love him. Come spring, the Northmen will have had a bellyful of krakens. When you bring Eddard Stark's grandson home to claim his birthright, lords and little folk alike will rise as one to place him on his high seat of his ancestors. Tyrion 3, A Storm of Swords. In Karth, where Daenerys has the visions, there is a group known as the Spicers Guild, opposed to the Spacing Guild, which depended on spice, and she imbibes mind-altering substances to receive said visions and expand her mind. And the unnamed daughter of Brandon the Childless, bearing to Bael a son out of her love for him, as did Jessica for Paul's father, Leto. Now, why would I bring all of this up? In the Ashara video, we talked about the vision Daenerys had of Rhaegar at the birth of his son Aegon. It seems strange, firstly because the birth of Aegon nearly killed Elia, and the naming of a child happens, by convention, on the day of the birth, which is why it's called the name day. Thus, if she was so incapacitated by her second childbirth, who was the woman nursing the child? Now, this man might have been a completely different father of an Aegon, who also has a harp, unlikely. But if we allow that Rhaegar, being a special lad, decided to name both his sons Aegon, acknowledge the possibility, however implausible, that this could happen, and understand this vision in the House of the Undying could in fact be of Rhaegar and Lyanna at the birth of Aegon. After all, when Rhaegar decides on the name Aegon, he sounds almost defensive. Aegon, he said to the woman, nursing a newborn babe in a great wooden bed. What better name for a king? Daenerys 4, A Clash of Kings. However, I must acknowledge this will be a lot to swallow. The counter-argument will be as follows. Firstly, Rhaegar looking for a third head of the dragon, ergo Jon must be number 3, assuming Rhaegar considered both Rhaenys and Aegon the Elder to be the children of prophecy. He shared my belief when he was young, but later he came to be persuaded that it was his own son who fulfilled the prophecy, for a comet had been seen above King's Landing on the night Aegon was conceived, and Rhaegar was certain the bleeding star had to be a comet. Samuel 4, A Feast for Crows. That was from Master Aemon, and the particular passage in Daenerys' House of the Undying Vision. He has a song, the man replied. He is the prince that was promised, and his is the song of ice and fire. He looked up when he said it, and his eyes met Dany's, and it seemed as if he saw her standing there beyond the door. There must be one more, he said. Whether he was speaking to her, or the woman in the bed, she could not say. The dragon has 3 heads. He went to the window seat, picked up a harp, and ran his fingers lightly over its silvery strings. Sweet sadness filled the room as man and wife and babe faded like the morning mist, only the music lingering behind to speed her on her way. Daenerys 4, A Clash of Kings. Secondly, Elia could have regained consciousness for long enough to cradle her newborn and have a conversation with Rhaegar, or Rhaegar was perhaps decent enough to wait for her until she recovered. As to these 2 points, fair enough, the Jon conjecture is rather ridiculous. George is rather mum on what the wife, which Daenerys assumes is a wife, looks like. He leaves the possibility open for one of many women in Rhaegar's life to be the one nursing the child. It could easily be Elia, or Ashara, or Lyanna, or any other wet nurse. And whilst Barristan allows that Rhaegar was fond of Elia, that doesn't necessarily mean he would trust her with prophecy. The fandom and Game of Thrones present that the birth of Jon Snow perfectly coincides with the arrival of Ned at the Tower and the duel at the Tower of Joy. That therefore the screaming that Lyanna did when she screamed out for Ned's name must have been the childbirth, and no other reason. Some even go so far to present that the troubled childbirth meant that Ned, Master of Obstetrics, MD, had to use Dawn, the Dane family sword, to perform an emergency C-section, and then Lyanna died later of fever from the bad childbirth. In The House of the Dragon, we are shown the result of such C-section, wherein Viserys I had his wife Emma subjected to such. Emma died from blood loss. She didn't survive long enough to develop a fever. I present to you, dear viewer, that Lyanna didn't receive a caesarean section. I wish to further propose that the birth of Jon, the battle between Eddard and the Kingsguard, and Lyanna's subsequent death were 3 separate events, not one convergence of perfect fate coming together. As an extreme possibility, Catelyn and Eddard conceived on their very first night together. Even when he took her maidenhead, their love had more of duty to it than of passion. We made Robb that night, though we made a king together. Catelyn's 5, A Storm of Swords. Let's start from the top. Between the tourney of Harrenhal, when Rhaegar first encounters Lyanna, and his kidnap of Lyanna in the new year of 282 AC, as much as 2 turns of the moon, which is to say 2 months, could have passed, according to the World Book. As the false spring only lasted 2 months, towards the end of 281 AC, before winter returned, and the tourney was held during this time. Now between then and the Battle of Ashford, Brandon must ride to King's Landing, be captured. Rickard Stark must be informed of this, must ride from Winterfell, take ship from White Harbour for the best speed to arrive in King's Landing for execution. Westeros may look like England or sideways Europe, but is roughly the size of the South American continent, just by guesswork. After that, Aerys orders Jon Arryn in the Vale, which takes him time by Raven, to hand over Robert and Eddard Stark. Jon Arryn declines, raises his banners, and must subdue the royalist forces in his own province. Robert then takes ship to Storm's End, raises his banners, travels to Summerhall with his army, probably to try and find Rhaegar because that's Rhaegar's favourite haunt, fights 3 battles in 1 day, has time to feast and hunt with the 3 lords he just defeated, possibly going all the way back to Storm's End by Stannis' account. And here is where the World Book gets kind of crazy. What made sense, before the World of Ice and Fire came out, is that following the Battle of Summerhall, Robert moves towards Ashford and gets beaten by Lord Tyrell's vanguard, which is the cavalry forces under Randall Tarley, suffering an indecisive defeat against the Highgarden troops. This makes some sense, as the vanguard forces would only compose of cavalry, thus be only a small proportion of the Highgarden's total forces, say less than 20,000 of the 50,000 troops they have available, which would be comparable in terms of size to Robert's Stormland host, and might explain an indecisive defeat. Robert then moves north to the Stony Sept to meet up with the Stark, Tully and Arryn forces, being caught by Jon Connington and the royal host before they can combine. However, the World Book suggests that Robert went north first, hid from Jon Connington at the Stony Sept and joined up with Ned and Hoster at the Battle of the Bells, then went south and was defeated by Lord Tully. This makes more sense in some ways, as Aerys didn't take Robert seriously until after the Battle of the Bells, according to Jaime in A Storm of Swords. It would take time for the large Tyrell host to muster, and Robert would have very little reason to push into the Reach, unless somehow he learnt of Rhaegar's destination after the Battle of Summerhall. More likely, they moved south, after the Battle of the Bells, to deal with the large assembled Tyrell host, while Targaryen host was reforming under Bowston and Jonathan Darry. In either event, it would be several months between Lyanna's kidnap and the Battle of Ashford. As few as 3, though some estimates I've seen put as late as 9 months. The World Book is intentionally an unreliable narrator, as it states that Lord Tyrell personally led his forces against Robert in the Reach section, when we know it was Tully. Why do we go for information? I do not know. Following the Battle of Ashford, the Tyrell forces would then besiege Storm's End for nearly a year. What is nearly a year? 11 months? 10? 9? At least another 9 months, on top of the time it takes for Eddard to travel from Storm's End to the Tower of Joy. From my Ashardane essay, Ned's fever dream suggests that until the lifting of the siege at Storm's End, he had no idea where the missing Kingsguard were. Thus I propose he would have had to ride or sail to Starfall to ask Ashara himself, unless she came to him or Highland Reed acted as some kind of magical plot device. All this is to say that an internally consistent narrative of the events of Robert's rebellion could allow up to 20 months between Lyanna and Rhaegar potentially getting it on at the tourney and Ned making it to the Tower of Joy. That is enough time for not 1 but 2 full pregnancies, if everything lines up for Rhaegar. Jon could have been born well before Ned even shows up. And due to the uncertainty of a bastard's time of conception, there is a common sense in the world of Westeros that bastards grow up faster than most. Jon remarks upon this himself to his uncle Benjen at the feast. This may be because of the stigma illegitimate children face, meaning they are less pampered. It could be that children born in these unions are simply healthier than their inbred marriages between the nobility and grow up sooner. Or it could be that Jon was born earlier than Robb. In any event, how likely was it that Jon was born exactly on the day Ned arrived? Which means Lyanna didn't die in childbirth, at least not with Jon, but perhaps a second pregnancy. A separate sickness, perhaps, caught in the foreign climate of Dorne, in which northerners would be ill accustomed, or perhaps poisoned by a trusted companion. After all, Jon Arryn appeared to die of a fever, which was in fact the effect of the tears of Lys, a rare and costly poison. Pycelle wrinkled his brow. In the last stage of his fever, the hand called out the name of Robert several times, but whether he was asking for his son or for the king I could not say. Lady Lysa would not permit the boy to enter the sick room for fear that he too might be taken ill. The king did come, and he sat beside the bed for hours, talking and joking of times long past in hopes of raising Lord Jon's spirits. His love was fierce to see. Eddard 5, A Game of Thrones. My point is that the standard assumption that Rhaegar only returned to King's Landing after he was assured Lyanna was pregnant is only one possibility. The other is that he was there for Jon's birth with enough time to get another baby cooking, before being found by Gerald Hightower and returning. I bring this up because there's a specific allusion to this in an exchange between Varys and Illyrio. Nevertheless, we must have time. The princess is with child. The Carl will not bestir himself until his son is born. You know how they are, these savages. Arya 3, A Game of Thrones. Keep in mind, Varys and Illyrio are both Free Cities kids. Those of Essos can look down on those Westerosi as savages. An example from the Winds of Winter. Dana shrugged. He's very old. Not so old as the other ones, but he could be 30. And Westerosi, they're terrible savages, Mercy. Best stay well away from his sort. That's from the Arya sample chapter in the Winds of Winter. And for effect. Tell the Westerosi whore to lower her eyes, the slaver Krasnis Mo Naklos complained to the slave girl who spoke for him. I deal in meat, not metal. The bronze is not for sale. Tell her to look at the soldiers. Even the dim purple eyes of a sunset savage can see how magnificent my creatures are surely. Daenerys too, a storm of swords. We don't know if Varys has had any contact with the Dothraki, but he has had contact with the Westerosi for many decades. It could be that these two Essosi kids definitely see the Westerosi as savages. I mean, the Essos are old children of old Valyria. There have been cities around for hundreds of years. Sure, Westeros has been around for thousands, but they have been uncivilized by the perspective of the more cultured Essosi. Thus I present, this could be an allusion to the fact that Rhaegar actually remained at the Tower of Joy until his first son was born by Lyanna. Now, as for the timeline, a young Jon would still require a wet nurse, as weaning happens sometime after the second year of age of a child. So when Catelyn arrives at Winterfell for the first time and finds Jon there with his wet nurse already ensconced in the castle, this shouldn't come as a huge deal breaker for this theory. However, all this doesn't explain why Rhaegar would name a second child Aegon, unless he expected the first Aegon to just die, or he somehow survived the Battle of the Trident. And that, Your Honour, is how this became a Rhaegar is Still Alive video series.